What if death wasn't the end? What if extinction could be reversed and creatures lost to history could walk the earth again? Just days ago, science fiction became science fact when Sir Peter Jackson announced the most ambitious de-extinction project ever attempted, bringing back the mighty moa, New Zealand's legendary giant bird that vanished 600 years ago. This isn't a movie plot. This is happening right now. The acclaimed Lord of the Rings director has partnered with Ecological Biosciences, the world's leading de-extinction company, and the Ngāi Tahu Research Center in a groundbreaking effort to resurrect the South Island giant moa, the largest bird that ever lived. The announcement represents a watershed moment in conservation science. For the first time, humans are attempting to undo an extinction they caused. The project combines cutting-edge genetic engineering, massive financial backing, and indigenous cultural knowledge to achieve what was impossible just years ago. To understand the magnitude of this undertaking, we need to grasp what the moa actually was. These weren't just big birds, they were evolutionary marvels that defied everything we thought we knew about terrestrial giants. 9 species of moa once dominated New Zealand's landscape, ranging from human-sized to absolutely colossal. The South Island giant moa, Dinornis robustus, stood 12 feet tall and weighed over 500 pounds. To put this in perspective, imagine an ostrich scaled up by 50%, with no wings whatsoever, massive trunk-like legs, and a neck that could extend 20 feet above ground to browse treetops. These creatures were evolutionary anomalies. Unlike every other flightless bird on Earth, moa had completely lost their wings, not just the flight capability, but the actual wing bones themselves. They were the only vertebrates in history to entirely eliminate this fundamental bird characteristic, making them unique in the 150 million-year story of avian evolution. Their bodies were marvels of engineering. Hollow bones kept weight manageable despite their massive size. Their legs were power plants, muscled columns capable of propelling half a ton of bird at surprising speeds through dense forest. 3 enormous toes, each armed with dinner plate-sized claws, provided traction on New Zealand's varied terrain. The moa's digestive system was equally remarkable. A massive gizzard, often containing pounds of stones, ground tough vegetation into digestible pulp. This biological mill allowed moa to extract nutrition from the most fibrous plants, enabling them to thrive in environments where other large herbivores would starve. Most fascinating was their feeding behavior. While modern large birds typically graze on grasses, moa were browsers. Their flexible necks could twist and contort to reach vegetation at any angle, making them perfectly adapted to New Zealand's dense forests. They weren't just survivors, they were the dominant large herbivores of their ecosystem. The moa extinction story is well documented but tragic. When Polynesian settlers arrived around 1300 CE, they encountered birds with no fear of mammals. Millions of years of evolution in isolation had left moa completely defenseless against human hunters. Archaeological evidence paints a stark picture. Moa bone deposits from early Maori settlements show systematic harvesting. Entire birds roasted in earth ovens, bones split for marrow, eggs gathered from nests. The largest, most spectacular birds disappeared first. The giant moa were simply too valuable as food sources to survive. Within 200 years, all 9 species were gone. It stands as one of the fastest megafauna extinctions in recorded history and one of the clearest examples of human-caused extinction. The loss represented not just species death, but the collapse of entire ecosystems that had evolved around these massive browsers. For indigenous Maori communities, moa weren't just birds, they were taonga, treasured cultural heritage. Traditional stories, songs, and oral histories kept moa memory alive long after the last birds died. The extinction represented a profound cultural loss that resonated through generations. This cultural dimension makes the current resurrection project extraordinary. The Ngāi Tahu's central role ensures that restored moa will be managed according to traditional values and contemporary conservation science. It's not just about bringing back a species, it's about healing historical trauma and restoring cultural connections to the natural world. The science behind moa de-extinction builds on techniques already being refined for other species. Ecological Biosciences, founded by tech entrepreneur Ben Lamb and geneticist George Church, has raised hundreds of millions to develop de-extinction technology. Their primary focus has been the woolly mammoth, but the moa project represents their most ambitious effort yet. The process begins with genome reconstruction. Fortunately, New Zealand's unique conditions have preserved exceptional moa specimens. Bones, feathers, and even soft tissue samples from caves, swamps, and archaeological sites provide the raw material for genetic sequencing. Sir Peter Jackson's extensive fossil collection adds crucial specimens to this genetic library. Advanced sequencing technology can now read DNA from specimens hundreds of thousands of years old. The Moa genome, while complex, is being painstakingly reconstructed from overlapping genetic fragments. Each specimen adds pieces to the puzzle, gradually revealing the complete genetic blueprint of these vanished giants. The resurrection process itself relies on a closely related living species as a genetic foundation. For Moa, that species is the tinamou, small ground-dwelling birds from South America that represent the closest living Moa relatives. Genetic analysis reveals that despite vast differences in size and appearance, tinamou and Moa share fundamental genetic architecture. Using revolutionary CRISPR gene editing technology, scientists can precisely modify tinamou DNA to incorporate Moa characteristics. This isn't random genetic manipulation, it's careful, targeted editing based on understanding exactly which genetic changes created Moa's unique features. The process works through successive generations. First-generation embryos receive basic Moa genetic modifications. Each subsequent generation gets additional changes, gradually transforming tinamou characteristics toward Moa traits. Size genes get modified to enable gigantic growth. Wing development genes get deactivated entirely. Digestive system genes get altered to process different vegetation. This generational approach means Moa resurrection won't happen overnight. Current estimates suggest 20 to 30 years before fully Moa-like birds exist. But intermediate generations will still be remarkable, progressively larger, more Moa-like birds that represent stepping stones toward complete resurrection. The technical challenges are immense. Beyond genetic modification, scientists must understand Moa biology, behavior, and ecological needs. Resurrected Moa must be able to survive in modern environments, reproduce successfully, and establish viable populations. This requires knowledge that extends far beyond genetics into nutrition, veterinary care, breeding behavior, and habitat requirements. Colossal's approach integrates multiple scientific disciplines. Reproductive biologists work on artificial incubation and breeding techniques. Nutritionists develop feeding programs for birds that ate plants extinct for centuries. Behaviorists study tinamou to understand baseline behaviors that might carry over to Moa. The project also involves sophisticated habitat preparation. Resurrected Moa can't simply be released into modern New Zealand. They need carefully managed environments that replicate historical ecosystems. The planned ecological reserve on Ngāi Tahu land will feature native vegetation, controlled access, and intensive monitoring. Conservation implications extend far beyond single-species restoration. Successful Moa de-extinction would prove that humans can reverse their own destructive impact on biodiversity. The psychological effect alone could transform conservation thinking, shifting focus from damage limitation to active restoration. Critics raise valid concerns about de-extinction projects. Some argue that resources might be better spent protecting currently endangered species rather than resurrecting extinct ones. Others worry about unintended consequences of introducing engineered organisms into existing ecosystems. Genetic purists question whether recreated Moa would truly be Moa or simply Moa-like hybrid creatures. The resurrection process inevitably involves genetic compromises. Some Moa characteristics might be impossible to recreate perfectly, resulting in approximations rather than exact replicas. Ecological concerns focus on habitat and environmental changes. The New Zealand that Moa knew no longer exists. Introduced species, habitat fragmentation, and climate change have dramatically altered the island's ecosystems. Resurrected Moa would face challenges their ancestors never encountered, but supporters argue these concerns miss the bigger picture. De-extinction technology development has applications beyond individual species resurrection. Genetic techniques pioneered for Moa could help save currently endangered species by increasing genetic diversity, enhancing disease resistance, or improving breeding success. The cultural healing aspect cannot be quantified, but remains profoundly important. For indigenous communities worldwide, de-extinction offers hope for restoring connections to ancestral landscapes and traditional ecological knowledge. The Moa project establishes precedent for indigenous-led conservation initiatives. Economic benefits could be substantial. De-extinction tourism would likely generate enormous revenue for New Zealand, creating jobs and funding conservation efforts. The country already markets itself heavily on unique wildlife experiences. Living moa would represent the ultimate ecotourism attraction. Scientific knowledge gained from moa resurrection will advance multiple fields. Understanding how to modify complex genetic systems has applications in medicine, agriculture, and basic biology research. The project will generate technological innovations with uses far beyond de-extinction. The timeline for moa resurrection involves several distinct phases. Current work focuses on genome completion and initial genetic modifications. The next 5 years will see first-generation modified embryos and hopefully successful hatches. Years 6 through 15 will involve breeding successive generations with increasing moa characteristics. Decades 20 through 30 represent the final push toward complete moa restoration. Birds from these generations should exhibit full moa size, behavior, and ecological function. Assuming success, the first true resurrected moa could be browsing New Zealand forests by the 2050s. Public engagement will be crucial throughout this process. The project team plans extensive documentation, education programs, and cultural events to keep communities involved. Regular updates will track genetic progress, breeding successes, and habitat preparation. International implications extend beyond New Zealand's borders. Successful moa de-extinction would likely trigger similar projects worldwide. Australia might pursue Tasmanian tiger resurrection, Madagascar could target various extinct lemur species, and islands globally might seek to restore lost endemic birds. The moa project represents more than scientific achievement. It embodies hope for planetary healing. In an age of accelerating extinction rates and environmental destruction, de-extinction offers a rare positive narrative about human technological capability directed toward restoration rather than exploitation. Whether the project succeeds remains uncertain. De-extinction is cutting-edge science with no guarantees of success. Technical challenges could prove insurmountable, funding might prove insufficient, or ecological complications could derail the entire effort. But the mere attempt changes everything. For the first time in human history, extinction is no longer necessarily permanent. Death might not be the final word for species lost to human activity. The age of de-extinction has begun, and the moa leads the way back from oblivion. In remote laboratories and field stations across New Zealand, scientists are already working to resurrect giants. Within decades, the forests might echo once again with calls that have been silent for 6 centuries. The moa's return would prove that with enough determination, knowledge, and resources, even death can be defeated. In laboratories across New Zealand, the impossible is becoming inevitable. Scientists are rewriting the rules of extinction itself, proving that human ingenuity can heal the wounds we once inflicted. The moa's return represents more than species resurrection. It's humanity's declaration that we can choose restoration over destruction, hope over despair. Soon, giants will walk among us once again.